out of making people talk. I'm Mick, the Doctor of Digital, and this episode is about word of mouth at scale, not as a tactic, but as a discipline built over decades of real campaigns, real builds, and real market attention. At one point, Saul breaks down why most marketing fails before it ever reaches the customer, because it's built for approval, not conversation, and how the best ideas spread long before anyone calls them strategy. And with that, I'd like to welcome Saul to the program. How you doing today?
I'm really good, Mick, and thank you very much for having me on the show. This is exciting.
Well, I think so too. So I'm really curious about digging in and finding out more about what your background is. Or so I'm seeing all the things that you've done. So before we talk about agencies, campaigns, or the book itself, I want to go back to the beginning. You were early in building a career around word of mouth marketing before it became a category, before it became a buzzword. What did you notice early on about why people actually talk about things?
Well, so it's an interesting story, and I wouldn't say I did it before as a category. Word of mouth is around, you know, the two oldest professions are prostitution and word of mouth marketing. They've been around since the dawn of time. But I got my start in word of mouth marketing because when I was about 18 or 19, I started a comic book publishing company. I really, my dream was to become a film director. And, I'm old. So when I was 18 years old, we didn't have iPhones that you could shoot a movie on. If you wanted to make a movie, it cost a few $100,000. So I started, writing stories and making my movies kind of on paper and comic books. And I was selling a superhero comic book with characters nobody had ever heard of for about $1 more than they could buy Batman and Superman. So I really, I took every chance. I did everything sort of the opposite of conventional wisdom. And that's really how I taught myself and learned the foundations of, really great word of mouth marketing, and, layered that on top of actual marketing disciplines and actual marketing education and training. But, the greatest successes I've had in my career have been from following my own sort of formulas and foundations as opposed to, the textbook classically trained marketing things. And that all came from, just starting my own business and not having anyone tell me, that's ridiculous. You can't do that.
Yeah, you can do it, right? Well, before the agency, before the title, what originally pulled you into marketing that people actually talk about?
For me, it was always just about connecting with people. It's marketers. Some marketers get a bad name because it is about coercion and it is about, we'll call it light manipulation or however you want to think. But for me, it was about really identifying what it was that made people want something, what it was about made people desire stuff, and giving it to them exactly how they wanted it. And that to me is always really exciting. Or if you can't give it to them exactly how they want, give it to them a way they've never imagined possible. So like I come from a comic book background. I come from an entertainment focused background. That's really how we've built our agency, but it's really always been about entertainment first as opposed to performance marketing first, or drilling metrics down to the smallest granular level and things like that. So it's been always been a very human approach to things. I think that's why people work with us. Like we do edgy work with things that really make people think and scratch their heads, and we can only do that because we understand the target people we're going for. We'll offend people who aren't customers. We'll do things that people can't believe, they're shocked by, they clutch their pearls and all that stuff, but they're not our customers. So I wouldn't care about offending those people. It's all about offering and servicing something exactly to the people who want this product. And that's what, It's one of the places marketers fall down. Everybody's trying to be broad. Everyone's trying to make everybody happy. But if everyone's happy, you don't have an interesting product. You don't have a product that people are going to be loyal to. You don't have a product that people are going to be talking about. It's really about love and hate are the thing that gets people to talk, and you have to really identify those things and work around those things.
I see. It's very interesting. You've worked across startups, agencies, and major brands. When did you first
Mhm.
realize attention behaves differently than traditional marketing models suggest?
So I would say that I never went down the path of traditional marketing. So it's I've had a really strange career. I don't know if I'd wish it upon anybody. I had the highest of highs where I'm on the covers of magazines, and I've had the lowest of lows when all of a sudden people stop doing word of mouth because they think there's this new thing called growth hacking or whatever, and we're going to follow that trend or go in that direction. So, I've never gone down the path. My whole strategy for my personal career has been the greatest in the world at a tiny sliver of a skill set. So if anybody in the world, and I've worked in 6 different countries, if anyone in the world needs word of mouth marketing, I'm the best there is. If you're looking for SEO or whatever, I don't take those projects. I don't try to pretend that we're a full service agency and things like that. We're catering to brave brands and brands want to be brave. And we're offering them a very, very unique and powerful solution. We're not trying to compete with, you know, almost anybody. There's nobody doing what we do as well as we do it. That doesn't mean that we're the biggest or the most popular. There's a lot of people with, you know, more awareness and all sorts of things that don't do things as well as we do. But they're also trying to do everything for people. We're only trying to do one specific thing, and we're the best at it.
Mhm. So, kind of curious then, like you've built your career around word of mouth. What's the most misunderstood part of what you actually and how it actually spreads?
I think the biggest the biggest misconception, people think word of mouth is luck, and they think it just happens, but word of mouth is engineered. There this is where you separate yourself from 99% of other marketers in when you're talking about word of mouth. Most brands treat word of mouth like it's a bonus or a happy accident, but every great word of mouth campaign has three things: something worth talking about, a trigger to start the conversation, and a way for it to spread easily. People don't share good, share interesting, they share weird, they share funny, or they share, holy shit, did you see that? And can't say shit on here, I'm sorry. I'll only say it one more time, shit. But talk about how when you think about it, referral programs work when they feel like insider access, not bribery. And I always talk about status is a really wonderful thing when you think of airline miles programs. I've been very fortunate in my career. I've traveled 1 million miles in the air. I've got more air miles than I'll ever use in my lifetime. So the air miles are actually not like important to me anymore. But what is important is getting on the plane first and getting overhead compartment. And these are things that I go for, and these are the things that I get excited about. So word of mouth are all these true things. They're all, it's not just getting someone to, you know, talk about a great experience. It's 100 different things. And people think that it's just, it's luck. You do something really great or you have a great product and people are going to talk about it. But like, I've 20 great products that I can see in my house right now that I never talk about. Is like I use my microwave every day. It does everything it's supposed to do, and it's never let me down. I've never, ever, ever once talked to a single soul in my life about my microwave. Same thing with kettle, same thing with all these things, because those brands have never engineered something for me to really have that conversation or start, turn to someone and say, you'll never believe what just happened. And that's the core of word of mouth. And people think, you know, they're just going to talk about it. And that's not what happens.
I can't imagine anybody really talking about something like this ordinary, everyday kind of thing. So where do you think most companies break it? Is it their message, their product, or behavior?
Um, where they break down when it comes to word of mouth.
Yeah, when they come
I
down to their message, like what goes wrong?
Well, I just don't think they think about it at all, and they don't prioritize it at all. Most brands are cowards. Companies says they want bold ideas, show them something bold, they panic and say, maybe we dial it back a bit. But it's the bold
Mm,
that gets talked about. It's the bold that gets
yeah.
shared. When a lot of brands, when they say, they want something bold, what they really want is something that feels bold internally but looks safe externally. And that disconnect kills great works. Playing it safe feels smart short term, but it guarantees long term irrelevance. Brands don't die from bad ideas; they die from boring ones. And
Mm,
the other thing that I think is so important is brands think they can live and die on performance marketing, but that's not the case. You know, and there's some nuance to this, but if you're not anti data, you're anti over reliance, and data tells you what's going on in the rear view mirror. It's not a steering wheel. Data tells you what's worked before. It cannot predict cultural movement or breakthroughs.
okay.
If you only follow data, you will get incremental improvements, but never exponential ones. No data would have told you to do a crazy stunt, but that's what people
Yeah.
remember. That's what people talk about. I've worked with companies where 62% of all new business came from our activities over a 12-month period. And that's something that nobody I think can promise when it comes to an SEO campaign, a word AdWord campaign, and things like that. And when you're engaging and involving customers, they become loyal, they become invested. And when they're invested, you're actually allowed to make a mistake or two once in a while because they see you as a person and not as a faceless company. It's like whatever telco you use, I'm sure at one time or another you've said, man, I hate these people. But you've never ever said, I hate Mick from AT&T. I wish Mick would die of
Yeah.
cancer or something like that. You say AT&T is
Sure.
awful or whatever brand you want to put in there. So when you put a human face on things and you do things with your customers and you create experiences for them, it creates so many other benefits than just the tell your friend.
Mm. When you look back at campaigns that work, is there a pattern or what pattern shows up every time?
The pattern that shows up every time is simply we're doing something that people never thought a brand would do for them. Like
Mm,
we literally had people say, it's like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. I don't really understand why you're doing this. When, I was working with a company called FreshBooks, and for our 7th anniversary, we threw a 7-year-old birthday party with bouncy castles and balloon animals and things. This was for adults. This was for accountants, and people loved it. There was ice cream trucks and all these things, and people were like, "Well, we don't understand why you're doing this." But over the next 6-month period, every one of those accountants referred our services higher than a competitor because they had that experience. There was these things, and we can't always track how many conversations happen, but because of these things. But we owned social media for a couple of days, and all
yeah.
these things, and we sent people home with pictures with the clowns with our logo on it for them to put on their desk. So every time, they look at a picture, they have that trigger, and they tell people come to their desk and say, what are you doing with clowns and mimes and things like that? What are you doing at Bouncy Castle and stuff like that? So it's not always about selling, but it is about selling. Everything ties back to revenue. Everything is tying back to that goal, but it's just not beating people over the head and saying you've got 11 minutes to take advantage of this 30% off offer or anything like that. It's about like creating a real brand affinity that is exponentially more valuable than a buy one get one free or anything like that.
Yeah, I want to dig into the book here a little bit too. And so your book focuses on the creative process. So what problem were you trying to solve when you formalized it?
So, like I mentioned earlier, in saying that I started by really developing my own way of coming up with ideas. The book was my way of sharing that because creativity. I like to feel like I'm blessed with a certain high level of creativity, but I also am smart enough to know that creativity isn't magic, it's a system. Most people treat creativity like it's a divine gift, and I sometimes do, but I also realize that the reason it comes easy to me is because I trained myself how to do that. And uh, I built a repeatable system, and I found a repeatable system, and one is the system of called Wombat, and it's the one I found, and it's something CIA uses. And Wombat is called what might be all the, and it's a way of reframing any question, so you don't limit yourself to small ideas. Instead of saying how we launch this product, you say what might be all the ways we can get attention for our launch? What might be all the ways we can get people to fall in love with our company? And it really sort of, widens the playing field when you're brainstorming. And the other foundation that I built myself is the laugh, think, cry. So laugh, think, cry is once you have the idea, you vet the idea through laugh, think, cry. And is the idea going to make someone laugh? Is it going to make someone think? And is it going to create a real emotion? And it doesn't hit two of those three things. It's not, the idea isn't fully cooked yet. And you have to, bake it a little more. I do believe the best ideas come from inspiration, but they also come from volume and structure. Bad marketers wait for ideas. Good marketers or good creatives generate 100 and pick three. So creativity is trainable. I've cracked the code on it. It's happened to me for through like I said, a reasonably good 25-year career that's still going and still performing at an incredibly high level. So I want people, like, if I have one legacy in this world, I want people to think like me and carry my name on and carry me around the room on their shoulders and stuff like that, because there's no reason that the next 3, 4, 5 generation of creatives can't be better, smarter, and faster by using these foundations.
So when you talk about creativity and marketing, what is it? Is it about structure, freedom? What is in creativity in your work?
All those things, but most importantly, most marketing fails because it's forgettable, not because it's wrong. Nobody remembers 90% ads, not because they're bad, because they're invisible, and invisible is kind of another way of saying safe, and invisible is another way of saying dead. You're not competing with competitors, you're competing with everything else in someone's brain. So when you create a volume of ideas and you don't limit yourself to the way everyone's always done it, or best practices and things like that, you have a much higher chance of breaking through and getting through. Because remember, the job isn't really attention. Your job is reaction. at least in the world of getting people to do something or tell something or whatever. Like anyone can buy attention. They just buy ads, billboards, TV. But if it doesn't make
Right.
someone laugh, if it doesn't make someone think, if it doesn't make someone feel something, the laugh, think, cry formula, if your marketing doesn't trigger one of those things, it's just wallpaper. It's garbage, it's toilet paper. And it does come back to where I said most brands are cowards. The best ideas often sound really stupid at first, like a 7-year-old birthday party and stuff
Yeah.
like this. And this is really important for founders and marketers listening. If an idea feels instantly comfortable, it's probably not only been done, but it's never gonna cut through, and that's instead of saying what might be all the ways, your best stuff probably started as this might be dumb, but, and that's a great way
Mm.
to start a conversation. That's not a red flag. That's the signal, and like
Yeah.
I could go on forever on this, but it's so important. Like now more than ever, we live in this noisy society where nothing, and people are so jaded and suspicious. If you're not really doing cool stuff, you're pissing away your money and patting yourself on the back. You got a 1%, or 0.7% increase in your revenue or something like that. You should be like everything should be going for calculated like triples and stuff like that.
Sure. My microwave works great, but you're right. I've never talk about it to anybody, but because it's
Mhm.
not memorable. So you talk about this laugh or cry. Is that what your idea? That's how you say something is talkable before it hits the market? Is that laugh or cry thought?
Yeah, think, laugh, and cry. Laugh, think, cry. If you can hit two of those three things, if it's something that's going to make someone laugh and it's going to make someone think, and if it's going to create an emotion, if you hit 3 out of 3, I can almost guarantee you they're going to tell a handful of people about whatever you just did and whatever you shared. Like it sounds so simple, but it's literally been, I've generated $1 billion over the last 25 years for my customers, for my clients. And I've never veered from this formula. Trends come and go. I never ride trends. Like I said at the beginning, I want to be the best at the world at a tiny sliver of a skill set. Because when you're a specialist, trends don't affect you. They may wipe you out and make you not relevant. But it's like, how many people have you seen that became the Google Plus expert when Google Plus launched, and 9 months later, when Google Plus didn't set the world on fire, all of a sudden they're the expert in Pinterest, or they're the expert in whatever. And if you pay attention, all of a sudden you realize they're not an expert in anything. They're just riding the trends. The great people, at least the way I've done it, is I ignore all trends, and I know one thing, and I know it better than anybody, and it's created $1 billion over 25 years, and very very few people can say that.
Yeah, speaking of the book again, what you've captured there, you've written a book after decades in the field. What changes when your work become codified into a framework, and how did you do that in the book?
It's always been a framework in my head. And I think that it just took me a handful of years to actually realize that. And then once I realized it, I've been thinking of writing this book for a decade, and I just never got around to it because I was too busy. And the only reason I wrote it even now is because I took some time off to care for my dad. He was dying. I basically wrote
I see.
this book in his hospital room while I was sitting, and he would look at me and tell me that I'm wasting time and not doing anything. So I wrote the book while I was with him over a 6 month period and stuff like that. But I've always had the formula in my head, and I've been sharing it for years in the form of keynotes and things like this. So this is not a new revelation for me. It was more of the book lives because of my dad dying, and I had time to actually write it.
Yeah. So the writing the only creative process that matters, clarify your thinking or just document what you already knew?
The thing that the book really helped me was to the, the frameworks were as clear as day. But I wanted to write a real book, not like a short book, and I wanted to include real world examples and things like that. So, if anything, the book like really forced me to do a lot of research and go through all the stunts I've done in my career and all the amazing campaigns, because I've done so much that I forget like a third of them. I've literally had people come up to me after I deliver keynote and tell me what their favorite thing that I've done in my career. And the minute they say it, I remember it, but it's just like it's not top of mind for me because I'm always looking forward. I'm never looking back. If it's like I've had a really great career, but if I'm only sitting around talking about the good old days, nobody's going to be interested in working with me. It's always about looking forward. So I don't spend a lot of time reflecting very often. So if anything, the book sort of forced me to reflect, and it was a nice journey.
Maybe you could give advice for some others. So how should operators think about turning their lived experience into something teachable?
I'm not sure I have the best advice for this. I could tell you, like I said, I did it because a little bit of ego, a little bit of legacy, a little bit of my dad telling me I should do it, and stuff like that. I'm not sure I would have ever gotten around to it because like I'm all about my clients. I'm all about the projects, and so I'm not sure I'm the best to ask about this.
You know, has word of mouth changed in the era of social platforms, or what has changed with the social media?
So I would say social media in a lot of people's minds, they think that is word of mouth, but in truth, 94% of word of mouth happens offline. It's happening in line at a grocery store. It's happening at kids' soccer games. It's one person turning to another and saying, "I just had the best meal of my life at this restaurant. You should probably go." And it didn't touch on this, but the reason word of mouth is so powerful is if I recommend a restaurant to you, Nick, there's about a 50% chance that you may check it out because like you don't know me. But the little bit of trust there maybe at this point. But if a friend tells you of a great
Yeah.
restaurant, there's almost a 90% chance you'll at least look into it or check it out because the backbone of word of mouth is know, like, and trust. You know somebody, if you like them and they try and you trust them, it's almost 90% accurate that you will do what they suggest you do. That's why a lot of influencer campaigns don't always work because people may know a celebrity, they may like a celebrity, but they may not completely trust the celebrity because they know they're getting paid for that recommendation. When it comes from a really good
Mhm.
friend, it
Sure.
goes much higher.
Mhm. For are we better or worse at creating things that people talk about today with social media?
I think people believe we're better, but just posting something social and sending it out into the world is very um, low return, low stakes kind of word of mouth. And like I said, people think that that is word of mouth, and it's like they say tack on my hashtag or whatever, and like there's been some things that have caught lightning bottle like the ALS water campaigns and stuff like that. Like that stuff did take off, and I give them all the credit in the world for doing stuff, but man, that's almost impossible to repeat or do. Like how many other charities tried to do something with no success whatsoever? It's like there's always going to be lightning that some people catch. But you're not going for the lightning, you're going for the long term.
Yeah. So we've talked about the book. We've talked about all the impressive work you're doing. So how do people get a hold of the book? How do they get a hold of you? Could you provide contact information so they can reach out and get the book at the same time?
Yeah, you can find me anywhere on the internet at Saul Colt, all one word, SAULCOLT, all the platforms, or at least most of the platforms. And if you want to grab the book, it's available at Amazon, The Only Creative Process That Matters by Saul Colt. You can also get an autographed copy for the exact same price, if that's your thing, at my website, theideaintegration.com.
Well, it's awesome, really insightful to see what you're doing, all the great work you're doing, because we'll all talk about it now after the episode and all the things you've done. Thank you very, very much for your time. I know you're very busy, so I appreciate you taking some time and chatting with me today.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think so too. Take care. Thank you. If you like the program, hopefully you'll subscribe and also say like and pass the word around, mouth around. So I also want to thank the sponsors of the Dr. Digital podcast. That's the publishers of both Burning America and The Best Interests of the Children and On Track, Ian Hunter. Thanks for joining me today until we got another great episode coming up and coming your way. Thanks for listening. Subscribe, like, and tell the word of mouth. We appreciate it. Thank you so much. Until next time, Deus Volt.